welcome to the Vagabond Way podcast. The journey goes ever on with The Long Road. This episode, Long Live the King. Join Steve Bonham, Kev Moore and Chris the Bish Lydon, that's me, as we discuss the Transatlantic Connection idea and movement, a desire to lift up the stories of ordinary folk inspired by the places and people from both sides of the Atlantic. Kev takes us on another leg of his worldwide journey of cafe spots, this time in Memphis, Tennessee, in honour of Elvis Presley, and I talk a bit about my failed baguettes, which is not a euphemism. The Vagabond Way podcast, featuring The Long Road, is exploring the world of the troubadour, the adventurer, the vagabond. The world isn't beige, it isn't processed, it's authentic, it's rich, and it's real. And if those are the sorts of sentiments that make your brain light up, then hop on board. We are embracing all of those things, celebrating all of that, and we'd love it if you joined us on the journey. Greetings, I am Chris the Bish Lydon. It's great to have you with us for another week. There's loads of actual proper content to get on with this week, so I'm going to try and keep my intro nice and short. Today you'll hear from Kev Moore taking us to Memphis in honour of Elvis Presley, and a rendition of an Elvis song recorded especially for this podcast. I'll get you a bit more up to date with my Bishop's Daily Bread baking antics, but before all that, join me, Kev and Steve Bonham for a chat discussing our plans for our newly renamed movement and YouTube show, the Transatlantic Connection. We renamed it from Anglo-Americana to help avoid the sensation of it being a genre. That Americana bit just sort of edges it that way. The name Transatlantic Connection, I think, makes it a little bit clearer to everyone what the thing's about. So that chat is up first. Don't forget that we have our curated playlists up on Spotify if you want to get an insight into our likes and influences. We're in the process of updating the names from Anglo-Americana to Transatlantic Connection. So if you search for either of those terms right now on Spotify, you should find those playlists. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to myself. So here we are again, the Long Road, getting together for another one of our chats from across the airwaves. So Kev is at home in Spain.
Buenos dias.
Steve is at home in Derbyshire.
Hey up, hey up.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming.
And I'm at home in Manchester. It's funny, I saw an interesting tweet yesterday that said, if you drive for 4 hours in America, nothing's changed. Drive for 2 hours in the UK, and you've been through 2 regional accents, and the name for bread rolls has changed.
Absolutely.
And I think the greetings, A up, mid up, and is A up is that a very Derby thing?
Yes,
I think so, but I think people in Oxfordshire would claim otherwise, but it's about as clearly Derbyshire as anything.
So, and I think maybe that leads us nicely into what we're going to talk about today: the feet in 2 sides of the Atlantic. This movement that we're building, we're trying to get momentum behind this transatlantic connection idea. The joining together of America and Britain, or this part of the world, this part of Europe. Steve, maybe if you could tell us from your point of view, what's the idea?
I think I just kept meeting people like myself and like you guys who just found the labels that you're supposed to be and the rules you were supposed to be following just didn't apply to the sort of songs that I was making. And I'm not a folk writer. I'm not a country writer per se. I'm not a rock writer. I'm not a thing like that. I think when I first heard Americana itself, I started to think, oh, hang on, I like what they're doing, because they're bringing the music back to the raw experience of your life, about the raw experience of other people, and they're making the music that kind of just comes out of that. It's not kind of elevated to a rule book. And for me personally, I was, someone like Steve Earle made me think about not just the topics I wrote about, but the textures and the stuff, and I loved that.
And there's an edginess to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there's something, we keep calling it moonshine, you're just taking a few ingredients, and you're making something for yourself. And I think Anglo-Americana is about making the music for yourself from these raw ingredients, rather than being told what to write. This is a country song, it should have 4 chords and one of them's got to be a minor. And about something that's may not have ever happened to you. It's writing songs about your own experience or the experience of the communities in which you were born. And I've, guys, I've been playing with the idea for 4 or 5 years, and what's been really exciting recently is I keep meeting people who that makes sense to. That they don't. They've kind of been told they're a blues, or they've been told they're folk, or they've been told they're country, and just don't feel wholly at home anywhere. But the things that inspired the blues and the folk and the country, that's the truth. It's the thing you go back, that's the raw material you go back to.
Mm-hmm. Don't you find that between the States and the UK, anyway, there's an incredibly long history of a musical conversation?
Yeah.
We've informed their roots music and vice versa, and it's only natural that out of that the musical conversation continues, and it's a natural outcome that we can tap into. I think that the genuine experience that style of music infuses into the songs, that's the hook. It's real.
Yeah.
That little phrase that Steve started using a few months ago, which really sort of brought it home for me, the extraordinary stories of ordinary people. And I think that's the thing that we're trying to tap into there.
Yeah.
I think it is that, and it's absolutely not about taking a template and trying to fit into the template. It's about telling a story. The story comes first, and then using the tools you have, the musical references, the instruments, your own kind of life experience to interpret that story and make it real for other people. And as Kev says, this is ongoing. It's been going on from the beginning. It's the Irish, the Scots, English ballads, all that went over to America. That then got absorbed into all the other people coming into the country, and that came back. And I was born in the time of skiffle, which is a peculiarly British interpretation of America. But it was real, and people building their own tea-chest bass guitars, and it's gone back and forth. And the Beatles heard this, and they went back, and back and forth. I think this resonates with people. It really does.
Me, I'm always the sort of the slightly academic one of the three of us musically, and I think back to the history of European music and how there are sort of chunks of classical music where you can identify sort of the country from the sound that it's making. But those, it's weird that the time periods that those that applies for, it might be you could spot a country from in a span of 100 years. It's that long a time frame. Whereas now we're talking about all these changes we've talked about are in the last 100 years in itself. All these dozens, scores, hundreds of different musical genres that have come out of America, particularly the southern parts of America, that are all informing each other.
That's interesting, that, Chris. It's picking up the pace, isn't it? It's picking up the pace.
Yeah.
And of course it's communication.
300 years ago.
It's communication.
300 years ago, the idea of, you could spot a German composer and you could spot an Italian composer, and there's only a few hundred miles between them. But it takes ages for the sort of leaching effect of different styles to go across. Now, in the 20th century and 21st century, it's minutes.
If I can use an example, one of my favourite guitarists, a Swedish guy called Jan Schaffer, he's been recording since around about 1972, I think. He did a lot of sessions with ABBA as a session guitarist, but his own music is primarily sort of jazz rock-ish, but he infused Swedish folk music into a lot of his melodies. Now, amazing. I wouldn't have been familiar with any of that stuff in earlier times, but he brought that to a wider audience.
One of the most famous pieces of classical music in the world, by Dvorak, from the New World Symphony, is a fusion of, Hungarian folk music and, we think now, Native American folk music.
Really? Wow.
And that was only the tune that we all think of as the Hovis music in Britain.
Yeah.
Do 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 do. That is a fusion of European and Native American
fascinating,
music
isn't
together.
it?
I think one of the key things that 20th century music brought was the idea of genres. And I guess during the sort of the heydays of the label, maybe that was useful when there was a record store that had the racks of LPs and CDs and things. And I think the key thing that grew out of that was communities of people who were into that music, and they needed a way of self-identifying. I'm into metal, or I'm into rock, or jazz, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to find here. We're not looking for the place where the CDs can be in the rack in a shop. We're building a community of people that are into this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, Kev, you've got bags of experience from the years of different sorts of communities, and you know how strong the community.
Yeah, the bonds are very strong.
Be.
Absolutely.
I think what's important to hang on to is that what we're trying to do here is not an intellectual position. It's an emotional, soul-based one. It's heart-based one. We're not saying, wouldn't it be great? Which I think rock went through that for a while, where it got too done clever for its own good.
Yeah.
And it started to say, we're going to take some of this and take some of that, and look how clever we are. This is actually just saying, no. What we're trying to do here is just respond to this thing inside that says, this is a great way of explaining myself at the moment.
Yeah. It's the human thing again, isn't it? It's that human connection.
To me, that's a beautiful, wonderful thing about human beings. We are bound to make music. And we're bound to write songs and sing them, and they are bound to be about what we feel.
We're going to be highlighting a lot of this. We're not content with radio now, are we, chaps? No, we're going visual.
We've got plans for world domination. So, as we alluded to, or maybe even announced, I think, in the last episode of the last series of the podcast, we are going to be starting a new YouTube show called the Transatlantic Connection Show. And that's going to be starting in September, so a couple of weeks from now. And the idea is we're going to try and showcase people that are going back to the source. They're not worried about what the genre label is, but they're going back to the things that inspired the human stories in all of this stuff. We've got a couple of people lined up that Steve's going to do some chats with. Maybe Steve can tell us.
Yeah. There's Rob McHale, who's actually award-winning album of the year on American Folk last year. He's a songwriter in North Carolina who comes over here quite regularly and writes songs about where he comes from, about the tally house up the road.
He's almost like a musical historian, isn't he?
He's a fascinating guy. So there's an interview with him, and then there's going to be an interview with Mal McWatt, who is just. He did an EP called Scale about 3 weeks ago, which are 3 songs about Scots going to America and the experiences they have. And he's really tapped into this idea. He's got it by himself. It was a meeting of minds when I spoke to him. And those 3 songs, to me, capture, as much as anything we're doing, what this is about. Yeah, quite a few more lined up, so that's going to be interesting. As long as you can make the technology work, Bish, we'll provide raw material, Kev.
I'll be delving into the hills down here in Spain, where quite a few luminary English musicians reside.
YouTube channel is a new thing for us, but hopefully we're going to be able to get it going, start building the community of people who are interested in this thing, and that's the thing. You can be shouting into the void, as it sometimes feels like we are, and not get anywhere. But actually, we're finding people are into this stuff, and they want artisan quality that we're trying to bring, and loads of people that we're connecting with that are messaging us, that connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, all those places. That quality and that humanity to it, I think, is the key thing. So the Transatlantic Connection show starts on Tuesday the 1st of September 2020 on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thevagabondway. Do join us for our new venture. Episode will be about 15 minutes long, and they'll be out every 2 weeks to begin with, and that will take us up till Christmas, so do join us. Next up, Steve Bonham, the vagabond philosopher, brings us a new song in the mix, so I'm going to hand over straight to him.
The song I'm going to share today for this Songs in the Mix spot is Blues on a Summer's Day. It's quite a unusual one. And I have to be honest, I'm not at all sure that this will work with the band or the band will be interested in it, but I love it. I really do. There's lots of things going on in this song, even though it's actually really, really simple. The idea came because I've been using these partial capos. Like normal capos, that they raise a particular set of chords you're playing by half a tone or a tone or whatever you want, and it's an easy way to accompany different songs and play in different keys. But a partial capo does something else. It only holds some of the strings down, so it creates all these strange chords that would be absolutely impossible to play, certainly for me, on a normal guitar. And I found them a source of lots of material on these recordings we've been doing. And I had this little riff, and I've been messing around with it for ages. And for some reason, the kind of thinking or the songs or words or ideas or spirit that came into my head was this song was going to be in some way about water. So the subject is partly out of that spirit, partly because too there's a whole set of songwriters and songs from the sort of late 60s or 60s and 70s of, from the first sort of wave of singer-songwriters in the UK who I've always loved. So there's Jackson C. Frank's Blues Run the Game, which is just a wonderful song and a moment of triumphant loveliness in a life that was incredibly sad. And I guess another one was Nick Drake's The Riverman, which is my go-to song quite often when I just want to transport myself to another place, man. And once I was travelling down, I bought an old barge, 56 tons of very old metal, called Emmeline, and I spent 3 days on my own completing a journey from Lichfield to Banbury, where Emmeline now lives. And it was hard work, chugging along. The days were really hot and warm and beautiful. And but there was 9-10 hour days of motoring on your own and then tying up to get a boat through a lock and opening the gates and then closing them, etc., etc. And it may have been the heat and the tiredness, but just one day I saw, as it came towards evening, a girl just standing looking into the water. It was such an enigmatic silhouette, really. You couldn't tell how old she was, and what she was wearing didn't seem to make any sort of statement about fashion or fashionableness or whatever. But it was just this intensity of her staring that sort of caught me. Anyway, whenever I'm looking at something, Emmeline starts to chug determinedly towards the bank. So I sort of had a few seconds of struggling to get the boat back on course. And once I'd kind of re-established my direction, I looked again and the girl had simply vanished. And it was just such a strange, momentary image and memory. It stayed with me, and it made its way into this song. And I think water does this, doesn't it? Water is a place of sort of ghosts and spirits and waterlogged dreams and reflections, and there's a kind of hallucinogenic quality to light on the water. What you see on the surface hides something very mysterious and ancient underneath. So out of all that rambling and thinking comes this song, and I really enjoy playing it, and whether it makes to be a long road song, I don't know. I think not, but perhaps anyone listening might drop a note and tell us.
So here is Steve Bonham singing a brand new song, Blues on a Summer's Day.
Jenny, she is waiting, the setting of the sun. She's been contemplating how the day was run. A bird flies high and cries some, cloud drifts by and hides some. Jenny, she is waiting, the setting of the sun. She sees a strange reflection in the old mill pond. He's like a thief a-calling from the great beyond. Golden chains and silver floating down the river. She sees a strange reflection in the old mill pond. Don't fly to Georgia, don't fly to Spain, don't go sailing galleons along the Spanish Main. Knight in shining armor, cowboy in the head. When you're feeling lonely, with the blues on the summer's day. Jenny bends her steps, the curving of the road, feels a little darker, as if the clock has slowed. The horny touch that binds her, forgotten note that finds her. Jenny bends her steps, the curving of the road. Don't fly to Georgia, don't fly to Spain, don't go sailing galleons along the Spanish Main. Knight in shining armor, cowboy in the hay. When you're feeling lonely, with the blues on the summer's day.
Hello again and welcome to another Kev's Cafe Corner. This week we head back to the USA and Memphis. The cafe, well, that's the one within Sun Studios, a place so steeped in legend and musical history you can feel it in the walls. You can sit at a bar stool there and order a drink while your mind is assailed by the memorabilia that literally fills every spare space. Gazing to the end of the room, there's an archway that leads to the record store, and from there you begin a journey of wonder through some of the great moments of recorded history. I felt it fitting to choose this location as we mark the anniversary of Elvis Presley's passing just a few days ago. As with such things, I remember exactly where I was when he died. I was on holiday in Barnstaple with a mate, keyboard player Tony Billinge. It was a big deal, the first celebrity death I was old enough to be affected by. Although I've never been a huge Elvis fan, as a musician it would be remiss of me not to recognise his importance in the birth of rock and roll as a modern art form, and that was brought home to me on my visit to Sun Studios. I learned that it was Sam's secretary, in fact, Marion Keyes, who was really responsible for giving Elvis to the world. She liked the shy young lad that came in with $1 to record a song for his mama. Later in 1954, when he returned to ask if he could be heard, Sam was hugely reticent, sick to death of the syrupy ballads, the sort of which the young Elvis wanted to record that day. Marion pleaded with Sam to give him a chance. Sam Phillips reluctantly agreed and sat with his head in his hands as Elvis ran a slow tune. When they'd done, however, Elvis, Scotty Moore and Bill Black on the upright slap bass started messing about with a country song written by one Arthur Crudup, and for fun started rocking it up. Sam looked up as if hit by a sledgehammer and pressed record. Rock and roll for the masses was born. As I was told this tale, which I retell to you, dear listener, I was stood in the exact spot where Elvis stood. I was holding his microphone. Rock and roll ground zero. The song, of course, was That's All Right Mama, and this afternoon I put a quick version together of it in homage to the King. It's rough and ready, but then, wasn't rock and roll always thus?
That's alright, mama. Well, that's alright for you. That's alright, mama. Just any way you do. Well, that's alright. That's alright. Well, that's alright now, mama. Any way you do. Mama, she done told me. Papa done told me too. Son, that guy you're fooling with, he ain't no good for you. But that's alright. That's alright. That's alright now, mama. Any way you do. Guitar. I'm leaving town, baby. I'm leaving town, sure. Well, then you won't be bothered with me hanging around your door. Well, that's alright. That's alright. That's alright now, mama. Any way you do. That's alright, mama. Oh, that's alright for you. Oh, that's alright, mama. Just any way you do. And you do. Well, that's alright. That's alright. That's alright now, mama. Any way you do. Do you wanna hear me sing it again? That's alright now, mama. Any way you do.
Well, I won't be back till next week, but that's all right, Mama.
I did a little Google for Radio Luxembourg, Elvis Presley, and found a recording of the broadcast the night that Elvis died. Radio Luxembourg were the first to announce the news in Europe, apparently, and Tony Prince, the presenter, ended up devoting his whole show, sort of 5 hours, to Elvis. It was quite remarkable, really, a little sort of slice of history. The recording I found was only the first hour of the show, but it's amazing. We've still got a record of it. These days, such an event would be quite different, I suppose. I guess we got that a little bit with Michael Jackson, what was that, 10 years ago now, I guess? But things like Twitter and Facebook weren't quite the beasts that they are today. I suppose we had David Bowie a few years ago. That was, 2016, I guess? But even then, I don't think Twitter and Facebook had the same sort of pull that they have now. I don't know. Anyway, it was interesting to look back at that real life event, and that actually inspires one of the songs that we've got coming up from the long road later in the year, which is called Midnight Radio. So look out for that when it comes. If you want to check out the Radio Luxembourg recording, just Google Radio Luxembourg Elvis Presley and you will find it. A few weeks ago, I wanted to try something new in the kitchen, as has often been the case with my Bishop's Daily Bread ventures. I wanted to try making a nice French-style baguette. I'm acutely aware that there are many interpretations of what this means. You know, the baguette that you'd get at an Asda or a Sainsbury's here in the UK is quite different to the baguette you'd get at a baker's or even a supermarket in France. And I'm not even sure exactly which style I prefer or which one I wanted to make that particular day. A quick Google of recipes, it's hard to know whether you'll get the sort of quite bready, regular crumb of a UK supermarket, the ones that are almost perfectly cylindrical, or the more irregular classic French baguette, much less uniform in shape, I think. And I'm not clued up enough on the science behind bread making yet to know from the ingredients or the method what the differences are and how to spot them and the results you'll get. Anyway, I found a baguette recipe and plunged in. As with a lot of breads, actually the recipe is quite simple, just sort of spread out over time. Now, I suppose this is following one of those very human, sort of authentic sensations, I think, trying to create something that fulfills both the here and now desires for sustenance, but also tickling that little nostalgia/memory centre bit of the brain to see if things match up with how you remember them. I get a similar sensation when I'm creating a jacket potato with beans and cheese, but that is another story for another time. Anyway, so throw into the mix the new endeavour, a new recipe, and it's exciting times for the brain. You can imagine my disappointment then when, following the dough's second proof, when it had been laid out in the long, thin baguette form and rising before going to be baked, I had failed disastrously. In fact, I'd failed before that point, but that's when I realised I'd failed. The nostalgia, anticipation sort of flitted away, and the here and now desires thought, oh, well, maybe at least they'll still be edible, eh? For the curious amongst you, I had gone what I thought was the modern route, yay for modernity, using a metal tray with 4 little, rows for the baguette to sit in. I think traditionally it's a cloth of some sort. It's got a special name, I can't remember what it is right now. But I figured modern must work. Clearly I've got something to learn, though. I dusted the tray with the rows with flour before putting the dough on, but the dough stuck. Mega stuck. So in the process of trying to move the dough from the baguette shaper to the baking tray to bake, all of the air was knocked out of them, and they were quite hilariously misshapen. It didn't look good. I baked them anyway. May as well see. You never know. But yep. Rubbish, utter rubbish. Technically edible, the bread was baked, but they inspired zero joy. So, baguette attempt number 1, a resounding failure, unfortunately. But, this can be learned from. More research is required. The metal shaper, how do you use this properly? Or was my dough just far too slack? It was very, very loose after the first proof. I wonder whether I got the proportions wrong, or maybe it's something else entirely. The raw ingredients were basically correct. The process was close, probably, but it can be refined. And the result can be improved upon next time. Fast forward a month, 6 months, 10 years, whatever it is, I am confident I'll be able to make some fine baguettes that will satisfy all those bits of my brain. The authenticity, the now, the nostalgia stuff. You mustn't give in. That's it. That's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening wherever in the world you are. Remember to subscribe to this podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify. The next episode will be out next Friday. Don't forget to join us on YouTube for the Transatlantic Connection show and become part of the Transatlantic Connection movement. Head to youtube.com/The Vagabond Way. Don't forget, we're also on Facebook, The Vagabond Way, or Steve Bonham on the Long Road on Facebook. All of our music is on Spotify and Apple Music, so go and have a listen, give us a follow. If you like what you hear, share it with your pals who might like it as well. We are on Patreon at patreon.com/The Vagabond Way. Big thank you to our Patreons, and a special shout out to Orla Flynn, James Lydon, Yvette Lydon, and Trish Taylor. Thank you. So Patreon is a great platform that makes it super easy for anyone out there, you, to support content that you love on a monthly basis. It gives you direct access to the people creating the stuff you love, us, hopefully, and you get to play an integral part in shaping the direction of things that we make. So become a vagabonder. That's our name for our supporters on Patreon, to help us create music, live performances, books and short stories, this weekly podcast, our YouTube show, and some new things we're cooking up. As a vagabonder, you can get the recordings and books we make for free, receive exclusive Patreon-only merchandise in the post, get regular behind-the-scenes updates from us, unlock access to exclusive live stream performances and Q&As, and lots more. You can help us create something different, something that entertains, and something that inspires others. So, join us on the journey and release the vagabond within. Patreon.com/thevagabondway. Thank you once again, brave adventurers, vagabonds, and explorers, for joining us on The Vagabond Way. Remember, the world isn't beige, it's authentic, it's rich, and it's real. Embrace every last bit of it. Until next time, the journey goes ever on with The Long Road. Bye for now.